Hey everybody, Maarten from QuadSpinner here, and today we have a special video, a starter guide for Gaea 2. So in this video we're going to cover all the important things to get you started on your journey in Gaea. So after we've gone through all the basics, we're actually going to create this Kyrgyzstan Valley terrain together. And if you don't know yet, Gaea 2 has just moved to a new forum, and there I will be sharing this terrain file for everybody so you guys can go and check out how it was made hands-on. Okay, so we'll leave this for later and we'll start a new file to discuss everything. When you're opening Gaea for the first time, you're probably going to be met with the start dialog. And in the start dialog, we can of course start new projects, open projects in our folder, or get our recent files. However, there are also very cool examples available. So if you're opening Gaea for the first time, it might be cool to just check out these examples, and maybe you see something you're interested in, you can open this file right away, and then you can see how it was created. This, for example, is the mineral deposits and color erosion example file. So here we can check out the texturing that was done and how it was shaped. However, if you just want to start with a blank new project, then we just click right here, new project. And before we get started, let's take a look at all the important options I want to tell you guys about. So we're going to click on tools and then options. And right here, we're going to have a few kind of important things that we have to check out. First, your central data folder. So the default location is in the documents, but if you want to move it, then you can move it here. Next up, we have the toolbox. So the toolbox is basically our menu here. So I have the toolbox compact. This is a layout I prefer, but if you don't prefer this layout, you can change it to your liking. So for example, you can change this to menus and keep the layout as large. And if we accept the changes, you see on the left side here, our UI changed. The toolbox also has a compact and expanded mode. The compact mode is just a little smaller and the expanded mode is just a little bigger. Next up are the nodes. So here I normally get a lot of questions in the comment section of people asking why I have a mask input under my nodes. And that's because I have turned on Gaea 1 style mask ports. This will kind of give us a little UI mask input under the nodes that is visible at all times. Otherwise, you can just drop a connection on the middle of a node and select add as mask. Next up is the build here. So the build output, this is where you're going to basically be exporting everything to when you are exporting your terrain and your meshes, height maps, color maps, all that. Here you're also able to assign different image formats for different types of masks or outputs. Cache is kind of interesting. So for the logs and autosaves, delete after 45 days is turned on, which means that our autosaves are going to be gone after 45 days. Now, if you are on longer term projects and it's important that you have this backlog of autosaves, then you should turn this off. Smart cache can be quite interesting. So when we have always cache the disk on close enabled, Gaea will basically cache the whole terrain as we close our file. Next time we open Gaea, the file will just open right where we left off. We don't have to wait for it to build. If you have the space on your SSD and you want to use this, you can turn it on. If you have to close Gaea a lot and get back into it, this could be a very useful option. The last thing I want to check out with you guys is the compute section. So normally the CPU will be turned on, but if the GPU isn't turned on and you can, turn it on. It will speed up your workflow by a lot. Next up, you can download OpenCL runtime for AMD and Intel CPUs. And this will speed up your CPU quite a bit as well. If you want to see how fast your hardware is and then enforce optimal settings, we can scan our hardware and it will basically run a benchmark. And then afterwards we can click on enforce optimal settings, and this will make sure that Gaea uses the quickest settings available. After this, we can accept changes and get started. So as we're in the viewport, there are just some simple things I want to cover with you guys. First off is the preview resolution. So right now it's set to 1K. So this means that if we preview a terrain, it's going to be at 1K resolution, and we can bring this all the way up to 4K. Now 4K is a lot slower, so it depends on your PC and on your preference basically. If you want to be working in a 4K or 2K or 1K or 512 setting basically, the lower the resolution, the quicker everything is. However, when you're at the end of your build, you preferably want to get as close as your export to see how your terrain looks, because if you're going to be exporting at 4 or 8K, you definitely want to see your terrain previewed at 4K, because then you can really see all the details that are going to be exported. Just keep this in mind, because if you're going to be exporting at 8K but you're working in 1K, you might be surprised by some of the details that you did not notice before. Next up, we have the preview render on the right side here, which we have a realistic render set as default, but we can also choose a clay render. I know some artists prefer this to work in because they're able to see the shape a lot better without the lighting and just the kind of ambient occlusion. And we also have visualized data, and this can be used if we want to see the 2D kind of texture data rather than the actual shape data. All right, now for some important hotkeys. It's just a few, but I think it's very important that you guys know about this. We can actually use T to switch between a 2D image view and the 3D view of the height map. This can be useful because sometimes an image that is used as a mask can be seen as a 3D object in the viewport, and we can just use T to switch between that. We have F3 for export. So if we want to export anything, we can either add an export node and do it like this, it's more manual, or we can press F3 and this will mark the node as an exported node. So once we get into the build settings, we'll be able to see this node and select what kind of image we want from it, etc. If we do this on a color node, we'll get a color output. If we do this on a node like this, on a height map node, we'll get a height map. Next up, you'll notice that when I go into the color, we don't actually see the shape of the mountain when I actually want that projected on it. So we can go to the mountain node here and press G, and you'll see this little pink icon. And this will basically mark it as an underlay, which means that any texture will be projected on it. One of the most useful hotkeys is the F hotkey. F allows us to pin a node. So if we want to keep a node visible while working in the settings of another node, we can pin the node that we want to keep visible in the viewport here. So for example, I can pin this mountain using F, and then I can open the draw node, open the painter, and start painting my mask. Doing this also allows us to see our mountain in this painter. Now that that is done, I can press F again and I'll be pinning the draw node. And if I press F again, you can see that the green icon disappears and nothing is pinned. This is particularly useful when you're trying to adjust a certain node before combining something. So for example, here I'm going to pin the transpose node, and now I'm going to edit this rock noise and see what the changes are. Lastly, one more interesting hotkey or keybind would be the shift left click on any ranges. So when we have a range, we can drag one side or another, but we can also hold shift and then just click in the center here and drag the whole range. This is quite useful to just quickly move both. All right, so now let's take a quick look at some nodes and their settings. So of course, each node has their own settings that are unique to the node, and we can adjust all these things here. However, there are a few things that are universal for all nodes that we can use. So for anything that has seed control, we can select several seeds here and just get different results for the output of the node. But we're also able to add seeds to memory. So when we do that, we can actually find it later. So when we then run through a few more seeds, we can find it here. There's also a cool option that the recent seeds are saved as well. So the saved seeds are for ones that you really think are special, and the recent seeds are just quickly rolling back to your previous settings. Next up, we have the modifiers down here. So the modifiers are basically used to just adjust any node or mask it quickly inside of the node itself. Of course, we're also able to bring these modifiers as their own nodes, but this is just inside of your node, so your graph will be less cluttered, and sometimes it's just easier and quicker to do it this way. So one of these modifiers will be masked by height. So of course we can bring in a height mask and then put it in the mask option right here, but just using it inside of the node works just as well in this case. And we're able to select the range here for this erosion and then shift left click and just drag this range around, and we can see the erosion happening within the bounds of this height. More commonly used modifiers are just out here, and if you want to know what they are, just hover your mouse over them. If we select our node, we can press P and this will create a portal. The use of a portal is basically to create a connection with another node without having this little wire running through it. We can also create connections to new tabs. So if we have multiple tabs up here with different node graphs, we're able to connect between them using portals. Now, this might be useful in case this slope selection is all the way over here and we don't want to have a long connection running all the way from one to the other node. We can just bring in a portal on the out here and then bring in a portal by pressing P on the in of this slope, and we're able to select which node we want to connect it to, and here we go. Lastly, one more cool thing is the presets. So you might notice that if I bring in an erosion 2 node, the settings are different from yours. That's because I've changed my default preset to something I like a bit more, and I've also saved several preset shapes. So if I click here and I use the soft fluvial erosion preset I made, it will instantly apply that preset, all the settings. So if you have a node and you have some options that you really like and you want to keep these options, we can click up here on this little cube and then create preset, and here you're able to name it and describe it. Now instead, if you want to create a default state of this node, then we can click this little check mark, and this will basically turn your preset into the new default of this node. You can do this for every single node. I even changed the default on the mountain because I like this shape a lot. So yeah, definitely use the presets. They're super useful. All right, so now that we've gone through all of these different settings, let's take a quick look at the nodes themselves. So I'm not going to cover every single node. We're working on recording documentation for each specific node individually, but I think right now it might be nice to go through each category and kind of explain the overall meaning and purpose of them. So let's get started. First, we have the primitive nodes. Primitive nodes are basically your base shapes. So we can bring in all kinds of simple primitives like a cone, but we also have some more complex primitives like the gabor, for example. If I bring this in right here, change the size a bit, and the anisotropy. This is my favorite primitive to start off on mountain valleys because the shape that it has is just perfect for it. We also have a Voronoi or simple noise, or you can even bring in your own files with height maps or color maps. You can bring in objects. You can do all kinds of different things. The primitives are there to basically bring in simple shapes, simple geometry, and with the file node, you can even bring in images for texturing. Next up, we have the terrain nodes. So the terrain nodes are also kind of base shapes, but they're presets for certain terrain. So we have a mountain, which is just going to be a preset kind of mountain shape. And in this preset mountain shape, we already have settings to add some simple erosion in all kinds of different varied ways. We're also able to change the scale and height. So these terrains are definitely a bit more complex than your basic primitives. We even have volcanoes, ridges, mountainsides, etc. Next up, we have the modify nodes. So the modify nodes are partially the same as the modifiers we have down here. However, there's a lot more of them. Modify nodes are, as the name implies, used to modify your terrains, masks, or textures with math, not simulations. So they're often quite quick, and the effects they can have on your terrain are very varied. There are so many different ones you can choose. I'll just drop in a few to show the extent. We have the distance here, which is quite cool. It's able to just kind of chip away at our terrain super quickly. We have deflate, which can be used to extract the high frequency details of a terrain. We have my two all-time favorites, the thermal shaper and the transpose. The thermal shaper has its own video on the channel already. It's an absolute powerhouse of a node. And then we have transpose, which is my absolute favorite way of adding super unique details on a terrain. Surface nodes are nodes you use to add surface details and enhance the shape. So these nodes are not yet simulation nodes. However, there are a few ones that are a bit heavier to run because there is some level of calculations that have to be made to make them. The outcrops for one is quite cool. You're able to get a bunch of rock detail with these, but they might take a little while to build at 4K. At 2K, they seem really fast. Another cool one is stratify or fractal terraces. These are of course used to kind of create the rocky surface of a stratified cliff. Yeah, that's what the surface nodes are. These ones are super useful to create that surface detail, the micro detail, etc. Now we're getting to the simulation nodes. So we have a wide variety of simulation nodes, and I still got to cover a bunch of them on their own documentation videos. but the ones that you'll be using a lot are probably erosion 2 and thermal 2. One covers hydraulic erosion and thermal erosion to an extent, all in one node, and the thermal erosion, of course, covers thermal erosion only. For beginners, there is also a very easy option, which is called easy erosion, and this is used for just kind of preset erosion. So you don't have to tweak all of these settings. There's just some presets for you that you can play around with, and hopefully this node alone can already get you some really cool shapes. However, if you're feeling ready for it and you want to explore the infinite variety and ultimate control, then check out the erosion 2 and thermal 2 nodes. There are videos on the channel covering these nodes already, and I'll definitely be covering them more in various tutorials, even in the tutorial later on in this video. Next up are the derived nodes. So the derived nodes are there to help you derive data for masks or texturing. So ones you're going to be using a lot is flows, slope, texture base. All of these nodes are basically used to derive data for masking or for coloring. So the texture base is there to give you a texture base for sap maps, and the slope, of course, select slopes, and the flows will give you a flow output. You get it. These are masks and used for all kinds of things. The colorized nodes are there, of course, for your texturing workflow. The ones you'll be using mostly are sap map, color erosion, HSL, gamma, or a more useful one like the splat map, which allows you to save 4 black and white masks in one texture, which is great when you're trying to save memory in other software like Blender, for example. Next up, we have the output nodes. Output nodes are there to prep data for export, or there is certain data that you can get that is good for export. Like the AO node gives you an ambient occlusion mask, which is really nice to add either inside of Gaea or export into Blender or another software to enhance your texture. In this output node, we also have the mesher and the export node, which are commonly used to export any kind of image, or the mesher is used to export a 3D mesh of your terrain. Last but not least are the utility nodes, and these are used in several ways to ease your workflow throughout the graph. The ones that pretty much everybody uses constantly are choke points and combine nodes, but there's also the accumulator at the edge and the gate and so much more. These nodes are probably not utilized enough, pun intended, but definitely try them out and see what they do. I'll work hard to make some video documentation on these nodes as well, because they are not getting enough love, and that's partially my bad. Alright, so now that we have covered all the nodes, I understand that was probably a lot, especially for beginners. There's so many things to explore. The only thing I can tell you is to just get into it, have fun with it, and explore. That's how I learned Gaea, and it's definitely how you could learn it too. However, if you are interested in following along for a little bit longer, I will be making a terrain right now, and you guys can follow along with the file that is on the forum. There will be a link in the description, or you guys can just watch me make this terrain and kind of just absorb the information through viewing. Alrighty, so let's get into creating this terrain together. Just a heads up, before we get started, remember I am using the Gaea 1 style mask ports, so they're always visible under every node that has a mask input, and I am using the compact toolbox as a UI mode, which allows me to see all my nodes here on the left side. Now, let's start in a new Gaea project. So just repeating myself here, you guys will get the terrain that you just saw as a file on the forums. Again, link in the description. I am going to attempt to recreate, or at least create something similar just from scratch right now. It's not going to look exactly the same as the terrain we saw at first, because there's different seeds and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully I can get pretty close in one go live. All right, so we're going to start off just by clicking new project, and right away I'm just going to save this as something. So here you can see all my terrain files, so many. We'll just call this Kyrgyz Valley tutorial. There we go. So we're going to start off with a Gabor. So as I said previously in the video, I really like the Gabor as a base for mountain ranges, valleys, etc. And that's because the shapes that we get from this Gabor are super interesting. We basically get this kind of noisy warping, and it's following a certain direction. Using the anisotropy, we can kind of break up said direction However, we still maintain those sort of mountain ranges. So instead of individual kind of blobs or, mountains or hills, we're kind of getting a range of mountains. So these longer connected ridges, which are really great and really realistic if we look at actual mountain ranges. You'll notice that mountains are often part of a chain and not just, individual behemoths standing by their own. Anyway, so the Gabor is really great for giving us those kind of chains of mountains, etc. However, the Gabor is also suffering a bit from being fairly uniform in height. So if we don't want to have all our mountains be relatively the same height, we can actually break that up a bit by using a purlin. Now the purlin is just a regular noise. So the purlin is a noise primitive. It's really great for having a lot of detail and kind of warpy blobbiness, but in our case we don't need that. So I'm just going to bring the octaves down to maybe 2, so it's not really that sharp. I'm going to bring the scale up to like 0.8, and that way we're just getting like larger variations in height. I'm just going to use this C control here, just kind of play around, and I think I see something I like. And at that point I'm going to drag the output of the Gabor onto the output of the purlin, which is going to automatically create a combine node. Here we can just combine everything together in various blend modes. So we have the blend, we have additive, screen, subtract, difference, multiply, etc. A bunch of different blend modes, and of course this is very useful, and yeah, you'll be using this a lot. So in my case, I want to use the purlin as a sort of height control to kind of add a varied height among the terrain. So I'm going to use the multiply, and after I've multiplied, we can already see that some peaks where the purlin is higher are actually higher up than the peaks down here in the front where the purlin is at its lowest. But I still want to play around a bit with the Gabor shape and with the purlin seed to just kind of get a good variety of peaks and ridges. So I'm going to actually increase the size of the Gabor a little bit. I'm going to turn up the anisotropy a little bit as well, and the entropy as well here, just to kind of maybe get a bit of a return to the direction, so we don't have just random kind of directions going everywhere. They are going in a certain direction, and if you want to adjust this direction, you can use the azimuth to kind of say which direction these valleys should be facing. I'll just keep it at 0, and I think this is looking fairly decent, and I'll just play around with some seeds. All right, so this is not bad, and here we go. Now for the purlin, it is going to bring our terrain down a bit, right? Because we're multiplying, so it's going to, unless it's a multiplication by 1 where it would just stay completely, in place, most of the purlin is probably hitting in a range of like 0.3 to 0.6, so everything is being brought down a little bit. So what I'll do here is use a modifier, and this is the height remap, and we can just add a little bit of height back into our terrain, preferably just looking at the highest point here around this, and I'm just gonna eyeball it. No need to be too accurate here. And I think this is keeping our terrain relatively stable, yet also introducing a bit of variation in height. Now, in case we wanted to make this variation in height more drastic and basically get a lot more variation, we can use an auto level here, which is going to range the terrain from 0 to 1. So we're going to get a more stretched out range here, which is going to have a more drastic impact on the height differences here. Yeah, we can always control it by the combine ratio. So if I turn this up a bunch, you can see it has a way more drastic effect. If we turn it down, it has no effect. I like the 0.5 effect here. It's just applying it a little bit, but not too strongly. Next up, I'm going to add a ridge. And the ridge is kind of my favorite way to add very low height detail, because it has a bunch of details, right? Like a little bit of these cracks and ridges. So there is some kind of ground detail. However, it's also relatively flat. So instead, you could use a constant, but this is going to mess with your erosion simulations a bit because it's completely flat. It's just a completely flat surface, which simulations just don't really like. It's not natural, and the calculations won't really know what to do when everything around it is the exact same value as it. it just kind of gets stuck in a loop, or it just kind of gets confused. So instead of having a constant, I think it's probably best to use a ridge. It's going to definitely work better for our simulations. And we're going to use this ridge as our valley floor. But to combine these two together, we're going to use a simple blend combine. But for this to work nicely, we'll need to use a mask. And I think it's fun to use the draw mask. So we can just draw in our valley. So right now it's being portrayed as a 3D kind of object, but of course this will be a mask. So we can press T to switch to like the 2D view, and you can see everything is completely black, of course. Now I'm just going to connect this as the mask right there, and you can see that nothing is happening because it's a total black value. There's no data, so it's basically saying there is no blending. Now what we're going to do is use this combine here. I'll just double click it to expand it. And we're going to press F, which is going to mark this as our main view. If we click on other nodes now, you'll see that the actual viewport doesn't change to them. So if you're ever noticing your viewport isn't updating, just press F a few times and just make sure that you're not pinning any node. So I will pin the node here and then head into the draw node. And I'm going to use the compass to place my orange, so which is the north. I'm going to place that on the top there, so this aligns with the 2D painter. So right now I can kind of see the 3D details here and look at my painter and realize where I'm at. So we're going to set the height to 1. This is just a value of 1. I'm going to increase the size of my brush to the max. And then I'm just going to start drawing in a valley. And I might get a little creative. I can kind of look at how the actual shape of the gabor is working with me here. So maybe it could turn into a little bend here. That could be nice. It's a little different from what I created for the example. But yeah, that could be good. So if I hold shift, I can erase what I've done. This is quite easy. But I'm going to actually broaden up this valley a little bit. There we go. I think this will be a cool little turned valley. If you ever accidentally like brush out of bounds, as you saw here, and you can just come back, and if you don't see your cursor, just make sure you select the actual box again, because you've probably accidentally selected the Gaea UI under it. But there we are. This is looking like a workable valley right here. I'm just getting into the corner, and we are ready to just click away. Now, of course, this valley is a bit more of a trench right now. It's very, very steep. And what we can do to kind of soften it up is we have a soften function here, which is going to blur our draw a bunch. And we'll notice right away that it is not completely turning this, area into a valley. And that's because I haven't set the ratio to 1. So once I do that, you can see that now this valley is just being carved into the terrain. And when we just click here to here, you can see the effects. Right, so this is a valley. It's looking pretty decent. Maybe it's a little too soft, but we'll have to see, really. If I set this to like 2, maybe that's a little better, because we're going to add rivers and everything that's going to cut more valleys from the side here into our terrain. And we'll just kind of see how this works out. But first, before we add any simulations, I'd like to add a little bit of a warp, just a little bit. Because for one, it's going to make the shapes a bit more interesting, right? The valley right now is very straight, and warp will break that up. And it's going to add a little bit more, micro details on the terrain that helps with the simulation. When we have a very smooth shape like this, erosion will work, but it won't look that interesting. So when we warp our terrain a little bit, it's just going to give it a bunch more data to work with. Now we can turn it down with the size and strength, but for now I'll just keep it like this and we'll see how this goes. And I'll quickly save. Next up, we're going to check the rivers here, and I'm going to make this a very strong river. So we're going to set the downcutting to 1 and headwaters to 500. And the river valleys I'll set to +2. And we'll see if this is looking good. Yeah, this is really cutting in these river valleys, and it's connecting it with the main valley here, which I'm really liking. Now, this valley might be a little bit wide, but we'll see in a second how this is going to look. I think it's looking okay so far. I think this might be ready for our first erosion pass. So we can right click, erosion 2 is already there for me. Otherwise you can just type in E2 and you'll see it right there. Now our erosion 2 pass is here, and you see that of course my default settings are a bit different than yours, but we're still going to change them a bit. So the erosion scale is important. The erosion scale is basically saying how many of these larger valleys there are. So if we turn this up, we're actually saying that the terrain is more small scale and that we need less valleys. And if we turn this down, you can see that there's a lot more of these valleys appearing, because we're basically saying the terrain is a lot larger, so the details have to be smaller. In my case, 200 is normally a kind of a value I go for, and looking at this, it's looking decent. We're not going to change the bed load or core sediments or anything like that yet. We're just here to then adjust the shape controllers, because these are pretty major. So you can see instantly it's going to adjust our terrain into actual kind of mountain shapes. And that's the thermal erosion hand in hand with the hydraulic erosion kind of doing their thing. I have these settings that are looking pretty decent. I'm going to turn up the shape detail scale, because in our reference, the actual mountains in Kyrgyzstan are not that sharp. So these details, you can see if I do this at a higher resolution real quick, the details are very sharp when we turn the shape detail scale down. And that's because of course the shape sharpness basically gets free control to just do its thing without any limitations. However, when we look at the reference, we actually see that a lot of these mountains are a bit smoother on the ridges. There is some, rock detail on these ridges, but the overall shape of these ridges, it has some bulk to it. They're not super sharp. So by turning up the shape detail scale a bunch, I mean all the way to the max here, we're actually maintaining a bit of that original rounded shape from the Gabor. So as you can see there, it's kind of maintaining a bit more of a wider surface area right on the ridges, which is great for us because that's exactly what we need. When I see a few things that might be issues right here, this could be potentially problematic, right? For the erosion sims later on, we can add a very simple node called hydrofix, and this is basically just going to fix any parts of the terrain where water might be struggling to get out. And it also allows us to kind of visualize already what the water flows will be doing in this terrain. So I can instantly tell that the water is not getting out on this side. It's kind of being blocked, so the rivers will be running into one direction out of the terrain, which I am personally liking. I think that's a cool way for this river to run. So hydrofix allows us to see that, plus of course fix any problems in the terrain in case there are any. Next up, we'll be adding one of my favorite modifiers, the thermal shaper. So one cool thing about this UI here, we can just select the node we have and then just click on the thermal shaper out here, and it's just going to automatically apply it. Now the thermal shaper kind of mimics the effect of thermal erosion in a non-simulation way. However, we can also bulk up terrains with the thermal erosion, and I think it's one of the strongest features because it allows us to add bulk to our terrain without sacrificing that kind of triangular mountain shape too much. Rather, it allows us to kind of widen the triangle instead of just rounding it out. So what we can do here is just set this to 0.5, so this is a positive value. So we're going to be adding bulk to our terrain. And then we have the scale here, and in the scale we can actually kind of select the size of the bulk. So right now it's rather small, it's kind of bulking up individual ridges, but if we turn this up, we can either make it so big that it's bulking up the whole mountainside on either side of the valley, or if we turn this back down to like 70, it will bulk up these mountains kind of individually, but still leave the valleys as well. And you can really see how that's adding that bulk. And I think this is one of the strongest nodes that we have inside of Gaea, because the amount of shaping control you get without sacrificing your shape you already had, it's amazing. Now we can also play around with the micro detail here. However, I think 0.5 is okay. We can maybe put it at 0.75, best of both worlds. And there we go. Right, so one thing I still notice in the reference, yet again, is that the bottom areas of the mountains, they seem very, very eroded, very smoothed out, just so soft and so smoothly eroded that I believe blurring it a little would even help a bit. Because right now we still have some details from the actual warping that are shining through, which some of them are okay, but we want the overwhelming, majority of the terrain at the bottom here at least to be quite smoothed out. So a very simple way to prep this would just be to use a blur node before we get into any detailing. I'm just gonna blur by a very low amount. So this is 0.005, and I'm gonna use mask by height, and at that point I can just drag this down and find a good height to start this at. And maybe make the fall off a bit more smooth as well. I don't want this to run too high because I'd be ashamed to lose too much detail here. But especially with these kind of lower ridge areas right here, I think it's better if they're a bit smoother. We're going to add more details later on in this terrain. There's so much left to do, so don't worry about it. All right, let's continue. At this point, I'm going to add a choke point. I kind of like doing this as a sort of way to segment my graph into various sections. This way I can also move stuff around more easily, and it just kind of helps me stay organized. An easy way to add a choke point is to right-click a node and insert choke point and then out. So this is going to add a choke point on your out point. And if anything is connected in between, like here, the choke point will just appear in between the nodes. So it's a really great way to just kind of add a buffer if you have a bunch of nodes connected to one single node. I'm going to delete this here with Control X, and Control X deletes the node but keeps the connection. And now I'll rename this choke point by pressing F2 when I have it selected, and I'll say base shape, something like that. I think that's a decent name. Everything before this will just be kind of the base shape, right? So in the base shape, I've done the heavy erosion, the erosion that really shapes whole valleys and all that, and really, shapes the actual terrain shape in a major way. Not the micro details, not the small erosion channels, none of that, but just the major erosion that has shaped this whole terrain is all being done here, plus all the other shaping done by modifiers and primitives, etc. We're doing it here. After this, we can use our surface nodes, our simulate nodes, and more modify nodes to just add micro details and really push our terrain into that realistic look. So we've just kind of finished the first step of the whole terrain here, and I think this is a really good point to make. It's the way of using nodes. So you could add erosion like this after you've added a surface node, but you'll be losing a lot of that detail. So if I just do a quick example here, I'll add a stratify to this. And the stratify is going to give me extremely cool rock detail. It's so awesome if I want these huge, rocky pillars. And now if I add in a really heavy erosion, that's all gone, Yeah, there's these weird kind of stratification lines running all over, and they are kind of warped and weird. In some cases, they can be super cool, as you can see here. I mean, this is pretty dope. But if you wanted, these strong, sandstone rock pillars out in the desert or something, then this is a problem because your shape, gets decimated by an erosion. Now, the thing is, it's probably best to first get your base shape with erosion and everything set up already, and then afterwards we can add our stratifies or our sandstone terraces, fractal terraces, whatever kind of surface node you want that is going to add this detail. So now you can see we get these erosion channels that is being created by erosion 2, but we're also getting that really rigid rock detail. So this is a big point. I often see people add erosion as like a last thing, and that is smart to do. However, you shouldn't be adding your super strong, landscape defining erosions as your ending nodes, because you'll basically be adding major changes all the way at the end of a graph. And that's just not really a smart way to go around it. Sorry to say it. But yeah, the best way is to have all your huge major changes be part of this beginning section, and then have more micro, details and softer changes be added later on. Now, after we've done the heavy erosion and we've added our surface nodes, if you wanted to add a layer of sediment, we could do this in a very light way, right? So we can add another erosion too, and we can see it's already kind of cutting into our terrain. But if I just turn the down cutting to 0, we can see already what's kind of happening. Not much is changing. If we up this a little bit, turn the suspended load down and just use, I don't know, coarse sediments, let's turn those up a bunch, turn the erosion scale to 250. So we're getting all these sediment buildups without majorly damaging the details that we added. And if you even want to be more protective, you can just set it to max blend mode. So only the additive sediments are on our terrain and none of the, down cutting is actually visible. Yeah, this is a smarter way to work, right? So we're doing a lighter erosion after we've added details, because then we don't destroy our details that we've, made. And with the thermal erosion, we actually have very strong controls here, because we're actually able to use an area mask, and that allows us to protect our slope details or other things that we mask out. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to tell you guys about, the best way of going around using nodes and in what order they should kind of be used. You can do anything you want. You're in complete freedom of using Gaea whatever way you prefer. This is just kind of a tip if you are struggling to maintain details or shape. Maybe it's because you're just doing things in an order that kind of work against you. All right, back to the actual terrain at hand. We are going to add some of our first rock details. So I'm going to start off with making let's do transpose node here and just drag that here. And so the transpose node is my second favorite modifier, as it allows us to add details without really changing the shape of our terrain too drastically. It's basically a more advanced combine node. So we're going to use a constant just as a flat surface here. And then we're going to use outcrops. And I'm just putting this in here. Let me just drag this out. There we go. So the outcrops, of course, are giving us these stone outcrops, but I want to have a bunch of them. So I'm just going to turn the density up to 1. And this is going to just cover our whole constant in these rocks. And now I can drag this into the reference, and you can see that the outcrops are being kind of projected on our terrain without changing our terrain shape too much. It's just kind of adding the smaller details. Now, of course, this is still quite strong, so we're going to have to find kind of a way to mask this. And I think a good way to do it is maybe on the peaks, because the peaks are a little boring. And if we look in the reference, some of the higher peaks are very, very kind of rigid and rocky. So I'm going to click precise here, and this is going to give us a bit more precise control. And I'm going to use a curve. A curve is great to kind of do all kinds of clamping and very accurate selection. So we're going to use it to our advantage here. I think this is looking pretty sweet, and we'll just plug this straight into the mask. So we can see now that all these rock details are being added on peaks, and it's kind of making the peaks pop out and be a bit more rocky and rugged, exactly like a lot of our details we see in the reference, where these peaks, even on the lower sections, are very rocky. And we're going to add more of that. So after we transpose, for now I'll just keep it. The fun thing about a node workflow is we can always just go back easily, find a node we want to edit, and just adjust later on. You don't create a terrain like this in one go. I have it already made, and I'm looking at my reference kind of redo what I did. But realistically, you'll be going back and forth and inserting new nodes and removing old ones and adjusting parameters all the time. Now, next up, I think it's time to just kind of give it that sedimenty look, and then we'll give it one more kind of round of rock detail in case we lost any of it. So that's kind of how I like to work. It's, again, just once the base shape is done, we add the major rock details. These could be terraces, like fractal terraces, or these could be these big outcrops as we see here. Then I like to add one more detail pass for erosion, and then I like to add another smaller micro detail layer of rock and surface details, and then at the end I do my thermal, snow, rivers, etc. So erosion 2, and I actually have a preset for this. I'm using the soft fluvial erosion here. Now this is still quite a strong erosion, I won't lie. It's definitely kind of cutting into our terrain here. Now, just checking this fluvial erosion preset I made in 4K, it's nothing too fancy, but it's actually kind of cool because we're really getting a focus on the micro detail erosion using this preset. So we have a bit of a longer duration of 15, but we have a very, very low down cutting of 0.02. The erosion scale is also set to 100. So in this case, we're going to get a lot of these kind of smaller channels and not like the bigger ones that we'll see at an erosion scale 500 or 1000. For the sediment discharge, the discharge angle of the suspended load is set to 40. So what this kind of means is the suspended load is some of the lightest sediment that is being eroded. And by having a discharge angle of 40, it's basically depositing a lot quicker. So it starts depositing at an angle of 40. So this means that a lot of our channels are going to be rather filled up with sediment instead of having very, very noticeable deep channels. Downcutting at this low number will also pretty much save you from having very deep grooves in your terrain. So even if I turn the discharge angle down a bunch, it's oh well, you can see it's making quite an effect. Yeah, it's basically keeping our sediments very high up on the ridges. I wasn't aware it was that strong. But yeah, there you go. So keeping this at 40, it's basically depositing the sediments a lot quicker. Same idea with the bed load and the coarse sediments, which are just heavier, bigger sediments rather than the very fine ones. In this case, I have coarse sediments set to a discharge angle of 15. And what you'll see here is these kind of flows here at the bottom. That's the coarse sediments because they're depositing themselves at a way lower angle. So they're rolling down the mountain actually a bit further. And other than that, the shape controls are just very, very soft. At 0.1, high shape sharpness and shape detail scale of 0.15. So because of the shape sharpness, having the shape set to 0.1 is already going to have quite a major effect on the terrain. Plus the fact that the downcutting is set so low. If we turn this up, these things are just going to turn into very, very smooth, just piles of debris from a eroded mountain. So yeah, we have to keep this shape very low. This is just a very specific preset, but it's a very cool one because it allows us to keep those erosion details, but just have less aggressive grooves and that kind of stuff running into our terrain. So only on really higher angles, we'll see a bit more of the sharper grooves becoming a bit more visible. And on this terrain specifically, it's really following the actual reference where most of the terrain is actually pretty soft. There aren't really super aggressive like ravines being cut by the hydraulic erosion. Only on really steep slopes, you'll see some more major kind of grooves being cut in. But on most of the terrain, the sediment is deposited rather quickly. And yeah, you can play around with these settings a bunch and get it to your own liking. I just think this is a great kind of preset for this kind of softer erosion. And if you want to minimize the erosion that it's actually doing, but still get the sediments, you can just turn the shape down a bit. The shape controls, because they're doing most of the actual destructive downcutting rather than just the sediment added, like basically adding the sediment. If you want to maintain a lot more of that rock detail, you could just either turn the shape controls off by turning it to 0, or you can turn up the detail scales here and let's see what happens. Yeah, so we're kind of maintaining a bit more rock detail by turning that detail scale up, but that's all up to you. I'm going to keep it at 0.15 here for now. For that smaller rock detail, I'm going to again reference, and we're going to look at this one, for example. It's a lot of blobby kind of rocks protruding from the terrain, and then they look very warped and mangled. So I'm going to add a rock noise, not a rock map, my bad. Rock noise. So this is just going to give us a flat plane and I'm gonna do just the maximum octaves. Octaves is just one way to say kind of like how many layers it's doing. So for fractal terraces, this will actually affect the strata layers, but in this case, it's just doing extra layers of these rock texture. If we set it to 500, it just covers the whole terrain, which I like. I'm gonna turn down the size a bit on some of these. There we go. And let's warp it a bit. This will be a very tiny warp. We will not be warping it like this and creating these strata lines, even though they're quite cool. We're gonna 0.001, 0.15, and a lot of roughness seems good. Now, not much is happening yet, but we're actually gonna plug this in here. And okay, so we're getting a bunch of crazy rock details, right? So this fluvial erosion kind of gave me these channels that we saw in the reference. These thinner channels were kind of created by that smooth like fluvial erosion that I have, which is just a preset. I'm using the name, but yeah, it's giving us these kind of channels right here. And now I'm going to add this layer of rocks on top of it. So here we go, how to do this. I think a slope will probably work, or we can do peaks again. It kind of depends. We'll just copy paste, simple Control C, Control V, and use the new input here. So we'll see if this works, just making it nice. Otherwise, we can just get a simple slope control. And I see that my curve is visible as a 3D object. Press T, change it back into a mask view here. And we're also going to check out the slope. Shift left click to drag this range and drag this to like 45. And this is not going to look good, right? Because there's a lot of details here. If we blend between the two with a sharp mask, the fall off is going to be sharp, which is going to cause a lot of noisy, weird spiking in our terrain. So what we have to do is use a modifier here and blur it. So I think it can range for very strong changes like terraces. You might want to blur it by 0.3 to really create a smooth fall off, but for these kind of smaller details, 0.15 should be okay. And maybe make this selection a bit smaller and fall off at 10. All right, so we're gonna just see how this looks once we combine this. So I don't have to transpose it because we already have the terrain here plugged into the rock noise. So just combining it and blending between the two. So we're just gonna input 2 here, max blend, and then use our slope mask. And I'm realizing at this point that I think I'll need to use 4K resolution because the micro details are just too hard to kind of figure out here. They're not really visible. So time to change the viewport to 4K resolution. All right, there we go. And this is looking super good. I mean, that rock detail is super craggy. It's really giving us that wild rock detail that we see in the reference. Maybe it should be even like more visible. So I'm going to use a shaper here and give it 0.25. This is going to push the brightness, push the actual like mask more towards the bright values. So it's a bit stronger on the actual brighter values. And here we see it. It's looking pretty good. Just going to turn the warp strength up by like 0.25. There we go. Some really rocky details. What about the peaks? Will they look good? I think I like the slope a bit more. So I'll just use the slope for now and just get rid of the peaks. It's not necessary to have there. It's always kind of good to go around and check everything out. So we're going to add a thermal erosion. And for the thermal to erosion, we actually can get quite accurate with the feature scale and the area mask. So we can maintain our rock details, but also blend them more into the terrain. So what I'm going to be doing is adding a slope mask again. And here we can actually say in which areas the thermal 2 should be working. So right now this is a bit too wide. Let's make it a bit more aggressive and let's see how it looks. There we go. And also I'm gonna turn up the actual angle here and turn down the feature scale. So the angle is gonna just say at which angle the deposits are kind of getting stored. And the feature scale is, well, the features that are being calculated, how small are they? So if we turn this down, the features being taken into account by the erosion are a lot smaller. So we maintain a lot more of the micro detail. Now I have to take a really good look here and kind of eyeball these effects here. So right now the duration is a bit short, so 0.15 will increase that quite a bit. And I'm just gonna really be checking, maybe allowing a bit more rock to be preserved. Oh yeah, that's gonna look way better. So I'm kind of looking for kind of a good integration of this rock detail into the terrain, and the thermal will just chip away a little bit around the rocks and just integrate it a bit better, rather than it just being rocks that are just piled up. The thermal will just kind of shape them in an eroded way a bit more. And then for sediment removal, this is extremely sensitive. So 0.1 is already going to remove most of the sediments that thermal adds, but we already have so much sediment on the terrain, so sometimes I like doing this. Maybe 0.05. We're just going to add a little bit back, but there we go. I'm mostly using thermal to chip away at the terrain. I don't need a lot more deposits being added onto our terrain here. Next up, we're going to add the rivers node. So let's see the rivers, and this will be our final kind of river. So we're going to make some adjustments here. The water, I like to keep it very low because this allows for thinner streams, but also streams that just kind of warp around, like kind of wiggle around the terrain a bit more, because there's less water, there's less force, so the water is stopped more, which makes it change direction or change course in a sense, which just makes the rivers a bit less straight. So I can add a bunch of water and I'll show you. Yeah, straight lines happening, like so. You see this like super straight line. It's because the water has so much power, it's just able to break through so easily. So yeah, lowering the water like amount allows us to just get a bit more wiggling and I forgot the name here, but the kind of wiggling through the terrain, finding the optimal route with the least resistance. There we go. We can also change the valleys in case we want the valleys to not raise up. We can use river valley -2. This will make sure that the river doesn't raise the valley. However, in my case, I kind of like this soft kind of valley fall off here. I think it's quite realistic. Raising it up a little bit doesn't look too bad. Makes it feel like if we go up this valley here, we're kind of gaining realistic elevation, I suppose. I really like this mountain here. It has a lot of detail. Maybe too much. Maybe we need to kind of see if I can work with the erosion and see if I can make this a bit less intense. Let me see. So yeah, there. It already had quite a bit of details, and then this pushed it over. So maybe we just transpose less of this, 0.5. And this is just making it a bit less intense, and let's see how that looks. And here you can already see me going back and forth, adjusting stuff previously done to get the shape I want to be a bit more in line with what I envision. Yeah, okay, I think that just made the rock details a bit less intense, and I think that's good, honestly. We don't need super intense shapes like that. Just gonna increase the shape detail scale here just a tad to see what it will look like. Maybe here we can add this, like maybe at 43, maybe 45 even, so that the thermal shaper chips away a bit more at the rocks here. And I'm really liking this. This ridge line here is looking really rugged and cool, and really like my reference if we check right here, like these kind of ridges that are just super rugged. Very cool stuff. Yeah, there we go. If we wanted to add more sediment, I think right here would be the option to just I don't know, turn down the down cutting perhaps and turn up the erosion. Yeah. So maybe 15. It's definitely a bit different than the one I'm sharing, but I'm not disliking it that much. It's actually pretty cool. This side of the range is quite boring, but the other side is quite impressive. It has some really huge peaks with a lot of rock detail. Anyway, moving on from that, let's add some snow. For this particular case, we'll just have some thicker, simple snow rather than like a bunch of high frequency details. I'll add snow just to the peaks as it's kind of melted. Maybe kind of the summer or spring season, I don't know exactly what the snow looks like over there. Depends on the altitude, I suppose, but we're going to get snow that is just kind of melted already and just kind of congregated in the concaves. So yeah, let's see here. Snow line should definitely be up a bunch. I want it to be at these peaks. That looks good. And let's melt a bunch. This might be too much. I always love just turning up the adhered snow mass a bunch, and then playing around with the slip off angle could be fun. So this is making it stick up the top a bit more, but then we're also getting these very obvious kind of straight lines here. What if we turn this down all the way? So yeah, snow is definitely a bit of a playing around thing. It's very sensitive, so you want to stay on very, very low values. Don't mess with like these huge jumps because the snow will just jump around your terrain very quickly. So yeah, just work slowly here, check details. Kind of like this, but it's not too bad. And intensity will kind of thicken what we have, and duration will add more on the flow here. That's kind of the thing I've noticed. So normally I keep my duration quite low in these kind of situations where I just want these kind of peaks to be covered and not to have a massive flow downwards. And then I just increase the intensity, which thickens what we kind of have on top here. And then we can also like use the melt to kind of melt away exposed areas a bit more, and then just add more intensity to kind of bring some more back. So it's kind of a playing around, right? You're just playing around with these numbers. And then the fun thing is here we have model scale, which just can just totally change our look. Might not be super realistic, but it's just a one slider kind of does all situation, which I kind of think is cool to have. I'll just turn this like so again. Now what I like to do, this is kind of a little hack. I just like to use the influence modifier and put it at like 0.8 or 0.7. And this is going to allow some of the details under the snow to protrude through, which makes the snow less flat and smooth and a bit more detailed with the actual terrain. So I like to do that with the influence, which is basically just saying how strong the effect is actually on your terrain, or yeah, anything pretty much. If we set the influence to 0, the snow is just a mask and it's not actually affecting our shape at all. So 0.8 is kind of a sweet spot for now. It's still covering all this rock detail here, right? But it's just showing a little bit of warble through the snow, giving it a bit more character. Might still work on this, might change the whole snow line, be lower. Don't know yet. The intensity might be too strong. If we look over here, and you can always add multiple levels, right? So we can do something like this where we just add kind of a snow layer here, like so, and then just add a second snow layer. And we can just plug that in here. And this one we can just make it melt further down. And when we do this, yes, we're obscuring a bit more of our terrain, but what we also get if we use the accumulator here at the end, just plug that in. And yeah, it's already set to snow, so we get the combined snow map of that. And it's just giving us a bit more detail, right? So we're getting a little bit more micro detail from this one, which is sitting a bit higher on the mountain. And then we're getting a bit more settled snow like here, and this kind of combines into a nice combination of two different levels. Now at this point I'm considering my terrain done, so I'm going to add a choke point, and here we go, and I'm going to rename this final shape, and there we go. And the accumulator I'll just call snow mask. And this is where I'm going to add my first portal. So here on the snow mask, a portal out, and on the final shape choke point, a portal out. And now it's time to start texturing. So to get started, we're just gonna go and use one of the derived nodes. It's the texture base, and I've set it to kind of new settings here that I have then made my new default preset. So you can copy them, but they're 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.1, 1, and 0. Yeah, this is just going to give me a more larger scale patchy texture rather than the very focused on, you know, features of the terrain kind of texture. I'll show you. So my goal is just to kind of create this, as I said, larger scale patchy texture, which I can then color erode and stuff afterwards, rather than getting a, you know, very based on slope, flow, etc. texture, which can just look a little artificial. Just keeping this a little bit more nuanced, it's better for me. And color erosion I like more than just getting it directly from the texture. So yeah, this is working quite well. We're getting these larger patches of kind of random colors, and that's going to really convey a larger terrain better. Now I'll just quickly look at the sap map I used on my own terrain. 36 on the green. Okay, so this is the actual sap map I used for the terrain that I'll share with you guys, and I think I then also play with the bias a bit to bring it up or down. Let's see. And let's bring the saturation down a bunch. And let's add some roughness. So this basically warps the sap map, and if we turn this up a bunch, it will just completely blur away. But a low warp is nice for some pixelized, like a pixelized style here. And the hue, let's play around with that, make it a bit more warm. Turn the soil down a bunch and turn the patches up so they're smaller scale, and then a bit more slope as well. Okay, yeah, I like these kind of gray, brown, green kind of patches that we're getting. I think they're very cool, although they are a little bit noticeable, but we're just going to use color erosion to get rid of that. So for color erosion, we're going to use the height, and then we'll use the final shape with our portal. So again, just press P and then select height, and then add the portal final shape, and then we plug in our color here, and that's giving it a bit more of a smoothed out, nicer look. Yeah, no complaints. I think this is going to be working fine. So for our next sap map, we're going to have to get a rocky sap map. So looking at our reference, it's just kind of gray, lighter rock, so it's not super unique or anything. Should be able to find a fairly decent solution. This one is okay, but might be a little boring. I want some detail, so I can use color erosion to get some variation in the rock. I mean, these are fine if we just turn the saturation way down. There we go. Add a little bit of a hue change here by turning this up a tiny bit. And there we go. And if we use color erosion again, so we just copy and paste this honestly and just plug it in. There we go. We got a bit more variety on the rock as well with the darker and brighter sections. However, I do like to add a little bit of extra rock detail using the occlusion mask here. And I already see what I did wrong. I plugged the occlusion into the texture base. That's my bad. You should plug it into your final shape. And I was already thinking it looked weird. Yeah, this is going to enhance the rock details here. So using the occlusion, just base settings of 2 and 2. I'm going to curve this to contrast it a bit more. And then I'm going to overlay this. So right now it's very dark. Just turn that off. Maybe lower that a little bit. I'm just trying to get some like cool highlight details. Maybe the curve is unnecessary. Although I don't want it to darken too much. So okay, let me just adjust this curve a tiny bit. There we go. And now we're just adding kind of like highlight detail on our rocks. And I do think it's maybe a little bit big. So I'm going to set this to 1 octave. So it's going to be a bit more fine. And there we go. It's kind of like a micro detail added on top of our rock here. And we can just adjust the strength. 0.6 seems to be a good number here. Perfect. Right, so this is just going to enhance the rocks that we have on this. And of course, in your DCC tool, whatever you're using, like Unreal or Blender, you can enhance this with textures and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, this is always nice to have in the texture of Gaea's output. It will just enhance the actual shape of the mountain a bit more. And we'll just combine this together with an interesting mask. So what we see is, we see the higher altitudes are more just dirt and rock, and then the lower altitudes are grass. However, what we also see are like these flows of kind of rock and a river that is also rocky. Here you see it best, these rocky flows coming down, and there's definitely some kind of like talus and stuff happening on these slopes. So what I'm going to do is get a slope. And again, I'm plugging this into the texture base. I'm supposed to plug it into our shape here. So I'm just going to add a slope mask and a mask by height. And the mask by height, I will just quickly select kind of a sort of height where it's above the grass or vegetation line. So something like this. And then the slope, I'm going to select 35, seems to be decent. And we'll use color erosion to push this mask a bit further. So in choke point, again, let's use a portal to the final shape choke point. And we can use the min blend mode. This means that all our minimum values are maintained here. So we don't like accidentally get like leakage over the slopes here. And this is giving us this kind of cool mask here that is looking pretty good already. So let's run it into our mask for the 2 colors we have. So combining those together and adding that as a mask and blending that to the max here, we get this very cool change from grass to sediments. Now if we want to get a stream that is really running all the way down with the rivers, we can just add a flow, and we just use a portal to connect it here, and then we can just turn the flow volume all the way down so we get these super sharp flows, right? And then you can turn the flow length up so you strengthen the flows a little bit. You can even find like a perfect spot here. Will work, and we can use the curves to then kind of clamp down on this a little bit, something like this, and we can just add it to our mask, right? So I just realized that this is all black, so we'll just invert it. There we go. Again, a modifier at the bottom here, and then we're just gonna combine these with a multiply. Boom. And therefore we have this. We can also, if you really want our rivers to be, you know, a river color, we can take our rivers output from the rivers here, or the depth of the rivers, it's up to you. And you can also add that into your mask But for now, I think this is easy enough to follow. If you wanted to, we could probably give it a little bit of volume, and that way it's just gonna run down these rivers like so. It can be very low. If it's not 0, at least it will run down the river. So you can get something like this. This looks quite interesting. Maybe it's not enough volume to break through this here. It's because the river is completely flat at the bottom here, so we're getting a bit of a thing where the flow simulation is getting a little confused as to where to go once it hits this spot, because this is kind of like a lake in the actual 3D sense. There's just no data here. It's completely flat, pretty much. So you can see the water kind of like bubbling around almost, like kind of getting confused as to which direction to go. And that's honestly not terrible, because there will be instances where water kind of pools up and only a few smaller streams break through into a certain direction and head out. So that's not 100% a problem. I just want to make sure that we really keep this as little as we can. Sorry, it's inverted, so that. And again, if you want a completely smooth like river running down, then just use the river's output and the mask from it. That way you can just ensure that your rivers are masked, you know, completely with where the water is. But for me, this is working. And then yeah, we're going to actually head into the snow. So we're going to add another combine, and this is rather easy because we can just use a P on the input too. So we're going to add a portal to the snow mask and just set it to screen blend mode, and we blend it, and there is our snow on our terrain. Now all this is pretty cool, but I think some vegetation will be good. You know, Kyrgyzstan has these very high elevation terrains where there is not much foliage. However, in my reference, I do see a lot of trees in other places. So I'm just going to add a trees node. And what am I doing? So I'm just going to have this trees node here and use the in with the final shape. So portal to the final shape. And we're going to grow some trees. So set this to 500. So we get a bunch of trees spawned all over the terrain. And right away, I can think that I want to have these areas kind of masked out. However, I need to invert it because this is an inhibition mask input. So, and the white areas are inhibited. So that means that we need to invert this mask, and then we can plug it into the inhibition here. And as you can see, that masks out the trees on all those areas. I'm also going to set this to avoiding water, because in my reference, yes, the trees grow near water sources, but they also avoid large flow areas where snow and stuff will come down from these mountains. So yeah, avoiding is probably the best option here. And then I'm going to turn the patches like way down, maybe up 0.05. I'm going to turn the spread up by 0.2. And it's already looking pretty decent. I'm going to turn the altitude fall off to 0.2. And the altitude to 0.3 or 0.4. Let's see. 0.3. So I don't want them to grow all the way up into this valley. So let's keep bringing it down until these trees up in the valley are gone. So 0.2. I think that's a decent little fall off. Maybe if 0.2 will make it a bit more natural looking. Yeah, that's okay. We're going to make the tree size really small at 0.03. This is just for visualization. We're just going to extract a mask from this for scattering in any other tool. I think I'm liking this pretty much now. It's giving me kind of like a patchy look. However, yeah, maybe it's still a little bit too much, a little too healthy. So let's see if we can cut away some of these trees. So we get the trim under tool here, and we can trim under certain areas and just get a finer selection of trees. I think this is pretty decent. They definitely have areas with a lot of trees, but then there's also areas that don't have many. So it's a bit of a hit or miss, but I think this is looking great. All right, so for the actual trees output, to get the trees, we're gonna do two things. First, we're gonna get a sap map and just get a simple green color here. Any green, dark green will do. And next up, we're gonna get an FX node or adjust node, however you want to call it. And we're gonna auto level this, and we're going to set the shaper all the way to 1, so this has a lot of brightness. And then we're gonna get one more FX node after this. And here we're going to use the modifiers down here with a blur, 0.025 maybe, and then another modifier set to strong. And this is perfect because we're basically creating a mask for, in my case, Blender, and we need those, more contrasty values, just black and white values to say where there are trees and where there shouldn't be any. And yeah, this is a good way to get that. So we can add a portal here on the out and rename this like tree mask Blender. And then in this adjust now we can actually use it for combining this onto the actual color. So combining this old color of the mountains before the snow, adding the new sap map, and just using an overlay, and then using this mask. So we're just getting all the trees, these little dots, colored green. So now if we use the trees as an underlay, you can see it looks kind of cool. I like to use overlay blend mode for trees, because then it kind of takes the texture of the terrain as well and sort of kind of projects it through, overlays it. So yeah, it's looking pretty sweet. And let's continue with prepping everything for export. So normally I like to do this kind of thing to just check stuff and see if I like it. I'll use a portal in the out of the trees, and then in the light X node, I'm plugging in the trees, and I plugged in the final texture, and this allows me to light my scene and just check it out from all kinds of angles, and I can kind of start thinking of a cool lighting / angle to render this terrain in. After you've kind of played around and enjoyed your terrain using light X, we can actually start prepping everything. And I'll start off with a mesher. So the mesher is just your 3D output of the terrain. You don't have to do this. You can just get a height map if you prefer that. But sometimes you maybe prefer a mesher with an adaptive topology, because this might be better for game engines and that kind of stuff when you need an optimized 3D mesh. I don't, so I'm just going to have a bunch of vertices per slide. And it's going to say it's going to be 16 million verts, but it won't be that bad. With the adaptive topology enabled, this will be 4 million vertices. I'm going to keep it as an OBJ. I'm going to create normals and create UVs, quite important. And you can also select level of details. So you get like 3 LODs. Each is like, 1024 vertices or less, but I don't need LODs myself. Next up, I'm going to just use a simple export node. I prefer using export nodes rather than pressing F3 on a node, because I can just directly rename the export node and I can see the export node in my node graph. This is just visually more engaging for me rather than having to constantly go into the build settings and nodes. So this export node, I'll rename this height map. Again, F2 rename, and I'm going to set this to EXR. Again, we need that, range for a height map to get like a really high quality height map. We will need the 32 bits. Next up, I'll use a splat to get pretty much all my masks. Right here, we're gonna select our flow and this rock. I think this will be my kind of rock or, debris output. So I'm gonna press P on this color erosion, and in here, press P on the portal and get the color erosion. Then I will get maybe the flow. Tree mask I should of course add, so I'm going to add the tree mask on the 3rd input here. Is there anything else I just need? I guess the flow is just all we need. So we can press out on this curve here and put that in the 2nd. So here we go. And then lastly the snow, so we can just on the 4th input add the snow mask. So what I'll call this splat then is rock, flow, tree, snow, just to kind of know what's, being put in at what level. And then I'll use an export here, and I'll set it to PNG 16, so all these masks have a decent dynamic range to kind of, play around with in Blender. And I'll call this as well, like rock flow tree and snow splat. There we go. And now we have an export of a height map, a splat map, and a 3D mesh. I want to add one more, and that's my color before the snow, because I will be adding the snow with a separate kind of material, for the snow inside of Blender. So what I like to have is just the dirt and grass color, and also another one for just only the dirt color. Again, the dirt and grass and the rock will all be their own materials inside of Blender. They all have their own kind of textures associated with it, but I do like getting this kind of color output to then overlay over my, PBR tiled textures, because this terrain wide texture has so many big macro details that are really great. And, a tiled texture from a PBR map, it just cannot give you those macro details unless you have to get really creative. But that's something I'll cover somewhere else. So normally I call this color and just have it as a JPEG, and then I call this dirt color. And I just realized that I'm actually exporting the one with the trees. We don't need the trees as well, because trees will be scattered in Blender for my case. So I just need this color right here without the tree sap map added on top of it. Okay, so that's all our exports. We got the splat map with all the masks. We got 2 color masks, which will probably just be using one, depending on if I choose to scatter grass or not. And then we have a height map and a mesher. And that's pretty much it. That's the terrain done. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and learned a lot. This is the starter guide for Gaea, so there's a lot more to cover, of course, but I hope that this covers all the basics and more. Thank you so much for watching. And again, check out the new forum. You can find the terrain file there. And for now, just enjoy your day and start thinking of some cool terrains to do in Gaea. I'll see you guys in the next video.